I want to start today with a confession. My favorite character in all of fiction is a child murdering space fascist. So, that feels like something I should probably unpack with a licensed professional, or at the very least, with several thousand of my closest internet friends. Because on paper, this should not work. If you were describing Darth Vader to someone who had never seen Star Wars, you would sound like a lunatic. Okay, so there's this guy. Okay. He starts as a slave. Wow, that's powerful. Then he becomes a wizard monk. Cool. Then he falls in love. Nice. Then he has severe attachment issues, commits genocide, helps destroy democracy, murders children, loses all four limbs, gets set on fire by his best friend, is rebuilt as a robot asthma machine, and spends the next 20 years enforcing a galactic dictatorship. And this is your favorite character? Yes, absolutely. Without hesitation. Your Honor, I can explain. Because Darth Vader is more than just a villain. He is one of the greatest tragedies ever put to film. He is Macbeth in a space helmet. He is Frankenstein's monster with a lightsaber. He is King Lear if King Lear could force choke admirals for poor quarterly performance. He is every story about fear, grief, pride, and regret wrapped in black armor and accompanied by the greatest musical cue in cinema history, courtesy of the one and only John Williams. And brother, that breathing, that iconic the sound of a man literally being kept alive by his own bad decisions. The galaxy's most expensive panic attack. Imagine if your anxiety got government funding. That is Darth Vader. And yes, before anyone jumps into the comments, Nate, he murdered younglings. Correct. That is, in fact, a pretty significant mark against him. Not ideal. Terrible for the resume. If LinkedIn had a children murdered endorsement section, he'd be in serious trouble. And yet, we still can't look away. We fear him, we pity him, we understand him. And if we're being honest, maybe that's what scares us the most. Because buried underneath the armor, the rage, and the monstrous choices is just a little boy who just wanted to protect the people he loved. And somewhere along the way, that love curdled into fear. That fear became obsession, that obsession became control, and that control destroyed everything. That's not just a Star Wars story. That's a human story. That's what happens when grief goes untreated. That's what happens when trauma meets power. That's what happens when someone is told they are special, chosen, destined, but never taught how to sit with pain. And suddenly, this isn't just a story about a cool villain, it becomes a story about us, about what fear can turn us into, about the lies we tell ourselves, about how good intentions can become monstrous actions if we let our wounds drive the ship, and whether, after everything we've done, there is still a path back. Also, he has a red lightsaber and a cape, which, let's be honest, does a lot of the heavy lifting. Hey, real quick pause if you're watching on YouTube, welcome to the lobby. Please be sure to like this video, hit subscribe, and smash that bell so you never miss a drop. Brand new episodes each and every Monday and Thursday. Now, let's get into it. Hey, and welcome to, or welcome back to, the Average Joe Nerdcast. I'm Nate, your resident Average Joe, your friendly neighborhood Natopedia, and living proof that you can fully understand that a character is objectively horrible and still think, yeah, but that dude is unbelievably compelling. And today, my friends, we are diving headfirst into what may be my favorite topic in all of fiction: why Darth Vader is, in my humble opinion, the single greatest character ever created. And yes, I know that is an enormous statement. We are talking about a field that includes Batman, Frodo Baggins, Walter White, Tony Soprano, The Terminator, Guts, and approximately 9,000 anime protagonists who were told they were weak before discovering they actually contain a universe-ending demon fox dragon spirit. This is very elite company, the Mount Rushmore of imaginary people. And yet, the giant asthmatic robot monk in a cape still takes the crown. Why, you might ask? Because no other character, at least for me, captures so many of the themes that make storytelling truly meaningful: hope, fear, love, attachment, loss, power, regret, identity, and redemption. And the terrifying possibility that the worst thing you have ever done does not have to be the final word on who you are. Now, that right there, that is powerful stuff. That is mythological stuff. That is grown man sitting in his office trying not to cry over a fictitious space wizard stuff. And if you grew up in the 80s, 90s, or early 2000s, then Darth Vader wasn't just a character. He was a force of nature. You heard that breathing before you ever understood what he represented. You saw that black armor and instinctively knew, oh man, this right here is the final boss. Not a boss, the boss. The one who shows up after you've already used all your health packs and your mom just told you you have 5 minutes before bed. Brother, you are not winning this fight. You are negotiating with fate itself, and yet the older I get, the more fascinating Vader truly becomes. You see, because when you're a kid, he's terrifying. When you're a teenager, he's cool. And when you're an adult, he's heartbreaking. You stop seeing a monster and start seeing a cautionary tale. A gifted, loving, deeply traumatized human being who wanted nothing more than to stop the people he loved from dying. And in trying to control everything, he became the very thing he feared. Brother, that'll preach. Or at the very least, that'll absolutely wreck you on a random Tuesday while you're folding laundry. So today we're going to explore why Darth Vader continues to resonate nearly 50 years after he first stepped onto the screen in the original Star Wars. We'll talk about the design, the mythology, the psychology, the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker, and the terrifying majesty of Darth Vader, and why, in the end, this story about a fallen hero and a son who refused to give up on him may very well be one of the most profoundly human stories ever told. So power up your lightsabers, cue the breathing, and join me as we descend into the helmet of the Dark Lord himself. This is why Darth Vader is the greatest character in all of fiction. There are great character introductions. There are iconic character introductions. And then there is the moment Darth Vader steps through the shattered doorway of the Tantive 4 in Star Wars. And brother, cinema was never the same. So let me set the stage. It's 1977. George Lucas is a bearded space gremlin with a dream, a pile of half-finished mythology notes, and a movie that many people assumed was going to crash harder than a drunken TIE fighter pilot. The studio didn't know what they had, and the actors didn't fully know what they were making. And audiences were about to meet one of the most unforgettable villains in the history of storytelling. The movie opens with one of the greatest visual gags in all of cinema. A small rebel ship screams across the screen, then, seemingly impossible, an absolutely enormous Imperial Star Destroyer follows it, and keeps going, and going, and going. It is the visual equivalent of seeing a squirrel getting chased by a Walmart supercenter. You instantly understand the stakes. The Empire is vast. The rebels are hopelessly outmatched. And then, the doors blow open. Smoke pours into the corridor, rebel soldiers are pinned down, white armored stormtroopers flood into the ship. And finally, he appears. Tall, black, mechanical, silent. Almost like a living shadow, Darth Vader does not run in. He doesn't shout, he doesn't monologue. He simply walks into the frame like the universe itself has decided to audit your soul. The cape flowing behind him like death with a dry cleaning budget. His helmet reflecting the chaos around him. And that breathing. The sound of industrialized regret. The wheezing of a man whose emotional support system consists entirely of anger and titanium. And before he even says a word, you know exactly what he is: power, authority, fear, and control. The final boss before video games had final bosses, the kind of presence that makes every other villain look like they're asking to speak to your manager. And then he speaks. The voice of James Earl Jones rolls out of the speakers like thunder wearing a tuxedo. Deep, measured, completely in control. He doesn't yell because he doesn't need to. When Vader talks, the room itself stands at attention. It is one of the greatest casting decisions in all of film history, because the design makes him intimidating, but the voice makes him mythic. And this is where the genius of Darth Vader really begins to reveal itself. Because you see, most villains are just obstacles. They exist to oppose the hero. They're boss fights with dialogue trees, a bigger health bar, and a much cooler soundtrack. But Vader? Vader feels like he existed long before the movie started. He walks onto the screen with history, with scars, with the sense that there is an entire life hidden underneath that mask. You don't know what happened to him just yet, but you immediately know something happened. Something catastrophic, something that ended with this man becoming a cybernetic tax auditor for evil. And that mystery is part of what made him so irresistible, because as kids, we didn't know all the details. We just knew this dude was different. He wasn't cackling, he wasn't delivering Saturday morning cartoon dialogue like, "Next time, Gadget!" Oh no, this man was out here casually choking middle management for poor performance. Just imagine being an Imperial officer. You spent 20 years climbing the corporate ladder. You went to the galactic equivalent of business school. You learned supply chain logistics. You probably sat through 12 mandatory HR holovids about workplace conduct. And then one day, your quarterly report is slightly disappointing and a 7-foot-tall cyborg monk crushes your windpipe with his mind, while everyone in the conference room pretends this is all just normal. The Empire had the worst employee retention program in the entire galaxy. And yet, despite all of this, Vader never feels cartoonish. And that's the miracle. He is theatrical and grounded at the same exact time, absurd and truly terrifying. A samurai, a knight, a Nazi, a grieving widower, a burnt-up monk trapped in a life support coffin. How in the hell do you combine all of those elements and somehow create one cohesive character? Well, you hand the keys to George Lucas, apparently. And whatever else you want to say about George, and brother, there is plenty to say. This man reached into mythology, religion, pulp serials, The Hidden Fortress, comparative mythology, Joseph Campbell, and a toy box, tossed it all into a blender, and accidentally created the modern myth. The helmet itself deserves its own documentary. Part Nazi Stahlhelm, part Samurai Kabuto, part gas mask, part demon, part expressionless machine. It is human enough to recognize, but inhuman enough to fear. And because you can't see his face, you project everything onto him. As kids, he's pure evil. As adults, that blank mask becomes tragic. A prison, a tomb with shoulder armor. A man so consumed by his own choices that even his own face has been taken from him. And underneath all of that machinery is the most unsettling truth of all. He wasn't born a monster. He became one. And if that isn't one of the most enduring and terrifying ideas in all of storytelling, then I don't know what is. Because under all of that armor, he's just a little boy from Tatooine. And that revelation changes everything. Because once the prequels arrived, Vader ceased to be just an unknowable embodiment of evil, and he became a case study, a psychological autopsy, an object lesson in what happens when unresolved trauma is handed near limitless power and zero emotional coping skills. So, in other words, the galaxy's most dangerous, gifted, and talented child. And if you're a former, you're so smart, buddy, you have so much potential kid who now overthinks every text message and occasionally spirals while standing in the cereal aisle, you may feel personally attacked by this story. Because Anakin Skywalker begins as a genuinely good-hearted kid. He's kind, empathetic, brilliant, mechanically gifted, and most importantly, deeply loving. And that's the key. His greatest strength and his greatest weakness are the exact same thing. He loves with his entire soul. This kid does not, quote unquote, care. He imprints. He attaches like emotional gorilla glue. And because he grew up enslaved on Tatooine, where loss, insecurity, and powerlessness were constants, he develops a fundamental belief that if he just becomes strong enough, smart enough, or powerful enough, then he can prevent the people he loves from being taken away. That is the entire tragedy in just one sentence. He is not motivated by cruelty. He's motivated by fear. Fear of loss, fear of helplessness, fear of being abandoned. Fear that the universe will once again rip away the people who make life bearable. And who among us, if we're being brutally honest, has not felt some version of that? That's what makes him so relatable. Not the murder. Let me be very clear. Not the murder. We do not relate to the murder. That remains, to use a technical psychological term, super bad. But the fear, the desperation, the belief that if we could just control things just a little more, maybe the people we love would stay safe. Now that's profoundly human. And tragically, it is exactly the belief that destroys him. Because the harder Anakin tries to control death, the more death he creates. The more he attempts to protect, the more he destroys. The more tightly he grips, the more everything slips through his fingers. It is the ultimate paradox. The boy who wanted to save everyone becomes the man who destroys nearly everyone. And underneath the armor, no matter how terrifying he becomes, that frightened child never truly disappears. The little boy on Tatooine is still there, still grieving, still afraid, still desperately hoping that if he can just become powerful enough, he can undo what has already happened. And that is where Darth Vader becomes more than just a villain. He becomes one of the most heartbreaking characters ever conceived. So let's talk about one of the most psychologically destructive phrases ever spoken to a child. You are the chosen one. Do you know what that does to a kid? Imagine you're 9 years old, you like fixing engines, you race dangerous pod racers for fun, you still need help tying your emotional shoes. And suddenly a couple of space monks show up and say, "Congrats, son, we believe you're the prophesized being destined to restore balance to the entire universe." No pressure, just the spiritual expectations of billions of life forms resting squarely on your tiny desert shoulders. Also, you're leaving your mom forever. And no, we do not have therapy. Welcome to the Jedi Order. When you strip away the lightsabers and mysticism, the story of Anakin Skywalker is, in part, about what happens when a gifted and traumatized child is told he is extraordinary, but is never given the emotional tools to cope with that burden. And brother, if you were a gifted and talented kid in the 1990s, this may sound eerily familiar. Teachers telling you that you were destined for greatness, adults insisting you had limitless potential. Meanwhile, no one explained how to handle anxiety, perfectionism, or the soul-crushing realization that adulthood mostly consists of paying bills and wondering why your knees sound like a bowl of Rice Krispies. Anakin is the ultimate gifted kid burnout story, the cosmic version. The what if your anxiety had access to a laser sword and a military command structure version. The Jedi, for all their wisdom, make one catastrophic mistake. They focus almost entirely on discipline and suppression. Feel fear, do not act on it. Feel attachment, let it go. Feel grief, meditate harder. That is not emotional health. That is spiritual duct tape. That is the intergalactic equivalent of telling someone, "Hey, have you just tried not being sad? And if you ignore pain long enough, it does not disappear. It mutates, it waits, it whispers." And eventually, someone like Palpatine comes along and says exactly what the wounded person most needs to hear. "I understand you. I can help you. You don't have to lose the people you love." That is how manipulation works. Not through obvious evil, but through empathy weaponized for exploitation. The devil, as they say, rarely appears with horns and a pitchfork. Sometimes he appears as an encouraging grandfather figure who validates your feelings and offers forbidden healthcare options. That right there is terrifying. Because by the time Anakin begins to fall, he isn't cackling with evil intent. He is just exhausted, isolated, and terrified. And he's convinced that everyone else either fears him, mistrusts him, or refuses to help. And that is where the tragedy becomes painfully real. Most people do not become the worst version of themselves because they wake up wanting to be monsters. They become monsters one compromise at a time, one rationalization at a time, one desperate decision at a time. I'm doing this to protect my family. I'm doing this because there is no other choice. I can fix this later. Bro, history is littered with those sentences, and so is everyday life. That is why the story resonates so deeply, because Anakin's fall is exaggerated for mythic effect, but emotionally, it is frighteningly recognizable. The Chosen One was supposed to save the galaxy. Instead, he collapsed under the unbearable weight of trying to become exactly what everyone expected him to be. And in that collapse, he became Darth Vader. So if Anakin is the tragedy, then Palpatine is the con artist. And this man may be the greatest manipulator in all of fiction. Forget the lightning fingers for a second and forget the voice that sounds like your tax preparer if he worships Satan. At his core, Palpatine is something much more terrifying. He is a predator who understands exactly where the cracks are, and then patiently widens them until the entire structure collapses. Because here's the thing. Palpatine does not create Anakin's fear. He does not invent his trauma. He does not manufacture his insecurities. Those wounds are already there. What he does, what every master manipulator does, is identify those wounds and convince the victim that he alone understands them. That's it. That's the entire scam. I see your pain. They don't appreciate you. They don't trust you. You deserve more, and only I can help. That line right there should come with a warning label attached. Because whether we're talking about cult leaders, abusive partners, authoritarian politicians, or your coworker who somehow turned a Facebook meme into a worldview, the playbook is always the same. Isolate, validate, inflame, control. Palpatine spends more than a decade grooming Anakin. And yes, grooming is the correct word. It's uncomfortable, but it's accurate. From the time Anakin is a child, Palpatine positions himself as the supportive father figure Anakin never truly had. And not because he loves him, but because he recognizes him as an asset. A powerful, emotionally vulnerable young man who desperately wants to feel understood. And once you understand that dynamic, the entire saga shifts. This isn't just a villain recruiting an apprentice, it's an older predator exploiting a traumatized prodigy while institutions fail to notice the danger unfolding right in front of them. How does the Jedi Council miss this? How is the most dangerous Sith Lord in galactic history essentially babysitting the Chosen One in broad daylight? That is like discovering the Antichrist has been coaching Little League for 15 years and everyone just assumed he was great with kids. And slowly, methodically, Palpatine feeds Anakin exactly what he wants to hear. That he's special, he's underappreciated, the Jedi are holding him back, that his emotions are strengths, not liabilities. But most importantly, that death itself can be conquered. Now, I need to pause here because this is the emotional kill shot. Anakin does not want power for its own sake. He just wants to save Padme. He wants to stop the nightmare that has haunted him. He wants to prevent history from repeating. He wants to succeed where he failed with his mother. And if you have ever lost someone or feared losing someone, then you understand exactly why this temptation is so devastating. Palpatine is not offering domination. He's offering hope, counterfeit hope, weaponized even. The kind that asks for one small compromise now and promises you can justify the rest later. And that, my friends, is how one of the most loving characters in the galaxy becomes Darth Vader. There are moments in fiction where everything changes. A single decision, a single sentence, a single irreversible act that divides a life into two parts. The before and the after. For Anakin Skywalker, that moment arrives in Revenge of the Sith when he kneels before Palpatine and says, "I will do whatever you ask." That line is the emotional equivalent of hearing the safety click off. Because from that point forward, the tragedy stops being theoretical. The dominoes are no longer wobbling, they are falling. And what makes this scene so devastating is that Anakin is not choosing evil for evil's sake. He's choosing desperation. He's choosing the possibility, however remote, that he might save Padme. That is the heartbreaking irony at the center of his story. The more he tries to prevent loss, the more loss he creates. The more he tries to protect love, the more he destroys the very thing he loves. This is where love mutates into possession. Care becomes control, devotion becomes obsession, and the line between "I cannot live without you" and "I must dominate reality to keep you" disappears completely. That is one of the most mature ideas in all of Star Wars, because healthy love accepts uncertainty. Healthy love understands that we cannot control every outcome. Healthy love says, "I cherish you even though I cannot guarantee tomorrow." Anakin cannot tolerate that uncertainty. And once fear becomes stronger than trust, he is willing to burn the galaxy down for the illusion of security. Now, yes, we have to address the temple, the younglings. The sentence that makes every Vader fan instinctively add, "Look, I know." Guys, there is no defending it, no rationalizing it, no, well, from a certain point of view, escape hatch. This is the moral abyss. The point where Anakin becomes complicit in unforgivable acts. And that is exactly why the character remains so compelling. Because the story refuses to sanitize his fall. It does not ask us to excuse him. It asks us to witness the horrifying consequences of fear unrestrained by wisdom. And then comes Mustafar, the literal and symbolic hellscape, a world of fire, ash, and molten rage where Anakin finally loses the last pieces of himself. His wife turns away, his best friend confronts him, and the man who once wanted to free slaves now declares, "If you're not with me, then you're my enemy." That is authoritarianism in one simple sentence: the death of nuance and the collapse of empathy. The worldview of every ideology that cannot tolerate disagreement. And then, in one of the most iconic moments in cinematic history, Obi-Wan Kenobi leaves him broken on the banks of a lava river, burning, screaming. Truly consumed by hatred, the transformation is complete. The hero who wanted to save the people he loved has become the monster he never believed he could be. And somewhere beneath the flames, Anakin Skywalker disappears inside Darth Vader. So if the duel on Mustafar is the death of Anakin Skywalker, then what comes next is one of the most haunting rebirth scenes ever filmed. Because let's be honest, at the end of Revenge of the Sith, Anakin does not merely put on a cool suit, he is entombed. This is not an upgrade. It is a technologically advanced sarcophagus. A wearable prison, if you will, the galaxy's most expensive life support subscription plan. Just picture the scene. Medical droids descend with all the warmth and empathy of an automated customer service line. Your soul is important to us. Please remain on the table. Mechanical limbs are attached, charred flesh is sealed beneath black armor, and the mask lowers into place. And in that moment, the transformation becomes literal. The exterior finally matches the devastation within. Everything human about him is hidden behind machinery. Every breath is forced, every movement is burdened. He does not wear the suit. He lives inside it. And that is why Vader remains such a powerful visual metaphor. He is truly a man trapped inside the consequences of his own choices. A walking monument to pain. A cautionary tale with shoulder pads. How many fictional characters communicate their entire psychological condition just by standing there? I mean, the armor says everything. The blackness suggests mourning. The rigid silhouette suggests imprisonment. The respirator announces that survival itself has become labor. Even breathing is now work. Every inhale sounds like remorse being processed through machinery. The universe's most iconic reminder that some decisions, they follow you forever. And then comes one of the cruelest twists in the entire saga. Palpatine tells him that Padme is dead, and worse, implies that he himself caused it. Imagine sacrificing everything to save the person you love, only to discover that your actions helped destroy the very future you were trying to protect. That is cosmic irony so brutal it almost feels Greek. The hero makes a bargain to defeat fate, and through the bargain itself fulfills the fate he feared. That's Oedipus with a lightsaber. That's Faust in a cape. That's I burned down my entire life to stop the fire. And what happens next may be the most important truth about Darth Vader. He does not become free after his transformation. He becomes emptier. The suit sustains him physically, but spiritually he is trapped. The Empire gives him purpose, the Emperor gives him direction, but the man inside the armor is a hollowed out shell, powered by rage, guilt, and unresolved grief. And that, my friends, is why Darth Vader works on such a profound level. He is not just a villain in armor. He is a human being who has become inseparable from his trauma. A literal machine built around unbearable pain, and for the next 2 decades, the galaxy will know him only as Darth Vader. But buried beneath the machinery, that little boy from Tatooine, he's still there, waiting. Now, before this episode turns entirely into a graduate seminar on trauma, attachment theory, and why the Jedi would have benefited enormously from one competent therapist, I need to address the obvious. Darth Vader is also just unbelievably cool. And my friends, we cannot underestimate how much that truly matters. Because storytelling can be psychologically profound all the livelong day, but if the character also looks like a demon samurai from outer space and enters every room like the final boss of existence itself, game over. Kids love him, adults love him, people who know absolutely nothing about Star Wars know him. My grandma could have seen a silhouette of Vader and said, "Hey, that's that breathing fellow." That is cultural penetration on a level very few fictitious characters ever achieve. And what makes it remarkable is that his cool factor has not faded with age. If anything, it's increased. When we were kids, Vader was intimidating. As teenagers, he was the definition of badass. As adults, we realize he is somehow badass and tragic at the exact same time, which, frankly, is the sweet spot. Because Vader does not fight like a flashy anime protagonist doing 12 backflips and yelling attack names. No disrespect to anime. You know I love my anime. But Vader fights like a man who is absolutely certain the universe belongs to him. Minimal movement, no wasted energy, every step deliberate, every swing utterly devastating. He walks into combat the way a dad walks into the garage when he hears a suspicious noise at 10 o'clock at night. Calm, focused, already annoyed. And modern Star Wars has done a phenomenal job of reminding us why everyone in the galaxy was terrified of this man. Rogue One gave us one of the greatest villain scenes ever filmed. The hallway sequence. Dude, what a gift! The lights go out, the breathing fills the darkness, a red lightsaber ignites, and for a few glorious minutes, the film essentially says, hey, in case anyone forgot, this man is the physical manifestation of unstoppable doom. It is cinematic perfection. And not because he's flashy, but because he is inevitable. Almost like taxes, or back pain after turning 35, or opening your banking app after buying just one more collectible. Anywho, then there's Obi-Wan Kenobi. Say what you will about the series as a whole, but when Vader appears, he feels like a horror villain. Dragging civilians through the street, extinguishing flames with the Force, toying with his former master. This is not a man merely trying to win. He wants everyone around him to understand that hope itself is on borrowed time. He seriously became the galaxy's boogeyman. The bedtime story Imperial officers told each other. Hey, you probably should finish your reports or Lord Vader will personally review them. And, I mean, let's be honest. The breathing, the cape, the red lightsaber, the Imperial March. John Williams composing what sounds like the soundtrack to your soul being foreclosed upon. It all works together to create one of the most instantly recognizable character packages in all of entertainment history. Vader is terrifying. Vader is elegant. Vader is mythic. And even after all the psychological analysis, the moral complexity, and the heartbreaking tragedy, there remains a very simple truth. Sometimes a character becomes legendary because they embody something primal. Power, fear, presence. The feeling that when this figure enters the story, everything changes. And no one in fiction does that better than Lord Vader. Now, before we can get to the redemption portion of the episode, I need to talk about one scene. Because it might be the most honest thing Vader ever says, and it comes from a place no one expected. In the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, their final confrontation, Obi-Wan is finally fighting back against Vader. The duel is brutal. And then it happens. Obi-Wan damages the mask, and through the cracked helmet, lit in blue and red, light and dark splitting the frame perfectly, you see him, Anakin Skywalker, looking back at the man who was his brother, his teacher, his failure. And Obi-Wan, broken, grieving, says, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Anakin, for all of it. And Vader looks at him and says, I am not your failure, Obi-Wan. You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker. I did. And holy crap, goosebumps. I'm getting them right now. That line. Because everything in Vader's story up to that point has been about deflection. About blame, about the Jedi who didn't trust him, the wife he couldn't save, the master who left him burning. And in that one moment, looking through a damaged mask, at the man who loved him. He takes full ownership. No blame, no deflection, no, well, from a certain point of view. Just the brutal, honest truth of a man who has lived inside his own choices long enough to name them clearly. And the staging, the blue and red lighting splitting Hayden Christensen across the frame, past and present, who he was and who he became. That is filmmaking doing exactly what filmmaking is supposed to do. It is also, and I want to name this clearly, one of the most important things a broken person can do. Not blame the people who failed them, not hide behind the wounds that shaped them. Just look someone in the eye and say, I did this. That is not weakness. That is the beginning of something. And it makes what comes next, the redemption, feel earned in a way it might not have otherwise. Because this, my friends, is where Darth Vader ascends from incredibly well-written villain to something genuinely transcendent. Because after everything, the betrayal, the genocide, the tyranny, the younglings, the 2 decades of galactic oppression, and what has to be the most catastrophically toxic coping strategy in all of fiction, the story asks a question so audacious that it still hits me in the chest every single time. Can someone come back? And not in a legal sense, let me be clear. If the New Republic had a functioning judicial system, there would be paperwork. A lot of paperwork. Probably a moon dedicated exclusively to witness statements. But I'm talking morally, spiritually, humanly. Can the worst thing you've ever done become the only thing that defines you? That is the question at the heart of Return of the Jedi. And the answer arrives through one stubborn farm boy who looks at the most feared man in the galaxy and says, essentially, I know there is still something good in you. That is one of the most radical acts of love in all of fiction. Because Luke Skywalker is not naive. He knows what Vader has done. He knows the body count. He knows the armor is filled with enough unresolved trauma to power Cloud City. And yet he refuses to reduce his father to the sum total of his sins. Just think about how extraordinary that is. The entire galaxy sees Darth Vader and sees a monster. Luke sees the man trapped inside the machine. The frightened kid from Tatooine. The broken hero who lost his way. And he bets the fate of the galaxy on the belief that identity is more complicated than our worst decisions. That is the kind of storytelling that stays with you for life. Because whether you are religious, secular, philosophical, or just someone trying to become a slightly less chaotic version of yourself, the underlying truth resonates deeply. Human beings are not static. We fail, we hurt people, we make choices that we regret. We become versions of ourselves we barely recognize. And still, the possibility of transformation remains. Now, that doesn't erase consequences, it doesn't undo harm, it doesn't magically fix everything. But it does mean that the story of a life is not necessarily over until the final choice is made. And at the end, Vader makes one final choice, not as an Emperor's enforcer, not as the Dark Lord of the Sith, but as a father. He sees his son suffering, and he sees the cycle repeating. And for the first time in decades, he chooses love over fear. He lifts Palpatine, sacrifices himself, and destroys the master who spent a lifetime exploiting his pain. And in that moment, Anakin Skywalker returns. And not because the past is erased, but because at the end he finally becomes the man he was always meant to be. And if that doesn't hit you right in the soul, then you need to check your midichlorian count. So after all of this, the mythology, the psychology, the trauma, the manipulation, the fire, the armor, the hallway massacres, the asthma-powered intimidation, and the single most emotionally loaded father-son relationship in all of pop culture. We arrive at the real reason Darth Vader has endured for nearly half a century. He contains multitudes. As a child, he's hopeful. As a hero, he is gifted. As a husband, he is deeply loving. As a fallen knight, he is truly terrifying. As a villain, he is absolutely iconic. As a father, he is tragic. As a man, he is profoundly human. That is an astonishing amount of thematic territory for just one character to carry. Most fictional characters do one or two things exceptionally well. Vader does everything. He is visually unforgettable, emotionally devastating, mythologically resonant, psychologically realistic, culturally universal, and somehow still the coolest dude ever to walk down a hallway. That is not normal. That is storytelling sorcery. And the older I get, the more I think what truly makes Vader extraordinary is how honestly he reflects the human condition. Because at its core, his story is about the tension between love and fear, between acceptance and control, between the person we hope to become and the shadow we become when our wounds go unhealed. Who among us has not felt the temptation to grip too tightly, to try to control what cannot be controlled, to make fear-based decisions and then spend years living inside their consequences? Now, no, most of us did not become cybernetic enforcers for an interstellar dictatorship. Though, you know what? Some mornings before coffee, I completely understand the vibe. But emotionally, spiritually, the struggle is recognizable. And that is why Vader never feels distant. He is larger than life, yet intimately relatable. A mythic figure who still reflects something painfully human. And then there's the ending. For all the darkness, the story ultimately insists that identity is not fixed. That even after catastrophic failure, one final act of love can matter. That no machine, no mask, and no amount of pain can completely extinguish the person beneath. Guys, that is beautiful. That is hopeful. That is the kind of story that sticks with a kid for decades and continues to reveal new meaning as he grows older. So yeah, my favorite character in all of fiction is a former slave, a gifted child, a war hero, a grieving husband, a mutilated cyborg, a fascist enforcer, and ultimately, a redeemed father. Which sounds absolutely insane when I say it out loud, and yet I stand by it completely. Because Darth Vader is not just one of the greatest villains ever created, he is one of the greatest tragedies, one of the greatest redemption stories, and one of the most profoundly human characters ever imagined. And in my opinion, the greatest character in all of fiction. And maybe that's why Darth Vader has meant so much to me for so many years. Because beneath all the spectacle, the lightsabers, the starships, the operatic music, the hallway scenes, the black armor, the cape that somehow adds 10 charisma points, his story is deeply, painfully human. It's about a boy who just wanted to protect the people he loved, a man who was told he was destined for greatness, a wounded soul who mistook control for safety, and a father who, in the end, discovered that love still had the power to break his chains. That story has followed me since childhood. When I was a kid, Vader was the absolute coolest villain I had ever seen. And when I got older, he became one of the most tragic characters I had ever encountered. And now, as an adult, as a husband, as a dad, and as somebody who has made his own fair share of mistakes, his story resonates even more deeply. Because if I'm honest, I think a lot of us are walking around in our own versions of that armor, carrying old wounds, trying to control outcomes that we cannot control, fearing loss, hoping we haven't gone too far, wanting to believe that no matter how much damage we've done or how much pain we carry, there is still a way back. And that, to me, is why this character endures. And it's not because he's powerful or he's terrifying. And not because he's cool, though, seriously, guys, he is unbelievably cool. But because his story reminds us that our worst decisions do not have to be our final chapter. There is always a choice, that love is stronger than fear, and that sometimes redemption arrives in the very last moments when we finally become the person we were meant to be. Also, let's be honest, the cape did not hurt. And that's it for this edition of Mainline Monday. Before I get out of here, if you're on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit subscribe and smash that bell so you never miss a drop. If you're on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen, do me a favor, follow the show, leave a 5-star rating and review. Word of mouth and reviews are how independent podcasts grow, and every single one of them matters. Then if you've got the time, come find us over in the lobby. That's the Average Joe Nerdcast private Facebook group. I'll drop the link to the group in the show notes, or you can head straight over to Facebook and in the search bar just type Average Joe Nerdcast the lobby and you will find the group. Tell me, who was your favorite character in all of fiction, and why? Is there another character whose journey has stayed with you the way Vader's has stayed with me? Head over to Facebook and drop it in the thread. Quick shout out to my player 2. Thank you for letting me talk your head off about my favorite space fascists for what I can only describe as an unreasonable amount of time. And for only saying, babe, please go make this an episode just one time before I finally did it. You're the reason any of this happens. I've been Nate, and remember, no matter how heavy the armor feels, there is still a man behind the mask. Stay gold, nerd bold, and I'll catch you on the next one. Oh, and before you go, we need to talk about one of the most emotionally devastating and illuminating scenes in all of modern Star Wars. The conversation between Anakin and Ahsoka Tano in Ahsoka. Specifically, their meeting in the world between worlds, because my goodness, that scene is not fan service. It is a thesis statement. It is Star Wars looking directly into the camera and saying, you still don't fully understand this character. For years, fans have argued about whether Anakin and Vader are two separate people, whether Vader killed Anakin, whether redemption erased the darkness, whether the good man and the monster can coexist. And then this scene arrives and answers the question with extraordinary clarity. They were always the same person. Not two identities, not two souls, just one man, one life, one story, and one legacy that contains both profound love and unimaginable violence. That is why the scene is so powerful. When Ahsoka confronts him, she is wrestling with the same question many of us ask about the people who shape us. Am I doomed to inherit the worst parts of those I come from? If my teacher became a monster, what does that mean for me? If someone I loved caused great harm, can I still carry what they taught me? My God, that is deeply human. Because all of us inherit complicated legacies. From our parents, from our mentors, from cultures, from history itself. And the fear is always the same. What if the darkness in them lives in me too? Anakin's response is subtle but profound. He does not deny what he became. He does not sanitize Vader. He does not pretend the darkness was someone else. Instead, he forces Ahsoka to understand that inheritance is not destiny. We are shaped by those who came before us, but we are not imprisoned by their failures. And perhaps the most beautiful part of the scene is this. Anakin is finally whole. Not split, not hiding, not pretending Vader was a separate being. He embodies both the heroic Jedi and the fallen Sith. And yet he stands before his former apprentice in peace. Brother, that is the final lesson. Maturity is not pretending the darkness never existed. Healing is not erasing the past. Wholeness is integrating every part of your story, the light, the shadow, the victories, the failures, and choosing what you will pass on. That is exactly why Darth Vader remains such a profound character, because his story is not about perfection. It's about fragmentation and reintegration, a life shattered by fear and ultimately made whole through love and acceptance. And in the world between worlds, Anakin teaches one final lesson. We are not defined solely by our worst moments. We are defined by what we choose to do with the totality of who we are. And that, my friends, is the true legacy of Anakin Skywalker.
Game over.